It's human to stretch, to go, to see, to understand. Exploration is not a choice, really, it's an imperative. Those were the words of American astronaut Michael Collins, who flew the Apollo 11 command module Columbia around the moon. For decades, this human desire to stretch, to explore, has taken us beyond Earth to space. Even after so many years, space exploration is not within reach for many. There are only a handful of spacefaring nations around the world. However, for those who are determined to dream big and realize their dreams, nothing is out of reach. My guest today is Martina Dimoska, the first female Balkan and the first Macedonian analog astronaut, who did not let the lack of presence in space exploration in her region limit her dreams of becoming a space explorer. Ms. Martina Dimoska is an engineer, published research scholar, the first Macedonian analog astronaut, and the first female Balkan analog astronaut. She is the founder and president of the International Space Alliance, an organization bridging the gap between agency, industry, and academia, bringing space opportunities to developing regions and accelerating equal access to space exploration. Ms. Dimoska's involvement and achievements in space industry are manifold. She is the lead organizer of NASA Space Apps Challenge Cleveland and Mountain View. She became an emerging space leader, a prestigious title awarded by the International Astronautical Federation. Ms. Martina Dimoska has a Bachelor of Material Engineering and Nanotechnology from the Faculty of Technology and Metallurgy via UKIM. She is a Global UGRAD alumni via Kent State University with a full scholarship. She completed the Commercial Space Studies program at Florida Tech with a scholarship from Aldrin Family Foundation. Martina's proactive lobbying placed her country in notable institutions, such as Space Generation Advisory Council. Martina later on became the national point of contact at the Space Generation Advisory Council from 2023 to 2025. Martina is currently finalizing her Master's of Space Studies at International Space University and is a senior NASTAR ambassador and earned NASTAR Center Wings, becoming suborbital space flight certified at the NASTAR Center. That's not all. Martina also has extensive analog astronaut mission experience. Martina became the first North Macedonian and the first female Balkan astronaut, completing her first mission, the NASA-funded analog astronaut mission called UND ILMA 14. And since then, she has completed 2 missions and currently serving her 3rd mission as a mission ambassador. Today, Martina joins us to share the intricate details of opportunities in space exploration, what it means to be an analog astronaut, and how you can find opportunities and sustain interest in space exploration. This is Career Calling, and I'm your host, Pratibha Pandit. Hey Martina, welcome to Career Calling.
I'm so glad to be on Career Calling after so many months planning this and arranging this. We both have really intense schedules, so it's finally happening, and I'm so glad to be here.
Yeah, I've been eagerly waiting to hear about your journey, and what you have done in the field of space is no small feat. You have not only forged a path for yourself, but you have paved a path for your entire region, which is amazing. Let's start from there. I think it is very hard for people who do not have understanding of the space industry to understand what a great feat that is. So why don't you introduce what space industry today looks like? Who are the players? How it is set up overall?
Absolutely. So, back in the day, especially in the era of the Cold War, we had a geopolitical situation where countries or governments wanted to have space exploration and pursue it as a path of innovation, as a path of showcasing their capabilities. The space ecosystem is much more broad. We have a lot of more countries coming as key players and contributed into the space sector. So, for those of you that don't know, perhaps key players would be space-faring nations who have constantly demonstrated capabilities. The United States, Russia is there, Obviously, Japan, India now, even the European Union with ESA, and countries like France, Germany, even Luxembourg, which is a
Hmm.
small country. We have so many novel players coming in. We have China as a player currently with their space station launched. And obviously, Brazil is an upcoming, even smaller regions and countries are upcoming key players. I can mention Egypt now. I can mention Luxembourg again. I can mention some movement in the Balkan region where I come from. I am from Macedonia in the Balkans, and we've seen some development there. But usually, the space industry was and is still led in countries by the governments of those countries that found their space agencies. NASA has a really great branding and great outreach. Everybody knows that blue logo, the meatball logo of NASA across the globe. But I'm not sure if people know how NASA functions. When I talk with people from non space bearing nations, for example, they think it's only one institution. It is not. NASA
Hmm.
has so many centers across the US that are strategically placed and serve various research purposes and research objectives. And they have incredible teams that collaborate together. Then there's ESA as well, the European Space Agency, with a lot of countries together that are a part of EU and also of ESA. And then we have another emerging player, which is JAXA in Japan,
Hmm.
and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It is still predominantly funded by governments and their national interest, and they do tie it with their militaries as well sometimes, and oftentimes it's an extension of the military. But currently, we also have commercial space
Hmm.
and the new space, so called, which is emerging. And we have companies that are now either collaborating with the government or just on their own, like SpaceX and Blue Origin and Axiom. They're either collaborating, for example, with NASA, or they're launching private astronauts, and you can buy yourself a flight to space as a private astronaut or a citizen astronaut, if you will. So I
Hmm.
love the emerging of first novel players, which is novel countries and novel regions. But also, the private sector is really noticeable and innovative and bold and coming through with so many novel technologies. And they're testing it out boldly, and it's so great to see.
Yeah, that's really nice. One question on the agency side. Usually, like you said, predominantly each country's government agencies own and control, regulate the space. How does it work in terms of anybody else getting into? Is it usually the citizens of those countries, or is there a path for other country people to enter as well?
Yes, so it's pretty nationalized, I would say. Obviously,
Uh-huh.
people who are born and raised in that nation do have a priority to enter, do have legislations and rules preventing, in a way, people to enter. One really big familiar term for the US is ITER, for example.
Hmm.
But there are treaties and collaborations and cooperations and agreements that can serve as a collaborative platform, whether it is through nations with policies or just attracting international
Hmm.
talent. Bills are passed for international talent if there's a scarcity or you need a specific knowledge and you don't have it nationally. So there are some different policies to collaborate. However, it is remarkably hard. For example, I come from the Balkan region, and in our Balkan region, and especially in my country, we never had a space agency.
Hmm.
We never had space history, no space heroes, no space education, literally nothing. North Macedonia is not a part of any industry out there in space exploration intensively, or doesn't have any negotiation capabilities because we don't have the education, or just in general, geopolitically, we're not as big. So, for
Hmm.
example, we're not a part of EU, and
Hmm.
that thus we're not a part of ESA. We're not there yet strategically to place budget or funding to belong. So
Hmm.
for me, as a person that wants to pursue space exploration, it's really remarkably hard to, for example, enter the job market of space because
Hmm.
it's just predominantly for US people or for ESA member states, etc.
Yeah, and that's why it's so incredible what you have been doing. I would love to hear your story. First, being part of a region where the space wasn't normal, where you don't really come to see a lot of examples. How did you come across? When was it, and how was it that you got attracted to space? What was that moment of inspiration for you? And then how did you go about pouring into this area?
So my story is a bit interesting. I guess people reacted like that. So I always say that I am trying to pursue the ultimate truth or to unveil the biggest secrecy that our universe entails.
Uh-huh.
And that led me to stumble on space exploration because you get into science and into chemistry and maths and physics, and then you ask for more and more. And that leads you to want to unravel the mysteries of cosmos. So it's really interesting. That pursuit of truth led me to stumble upon space exploration. And it was just this fascinating and undiscovered field. And I guess
Uh-huh.
as people, we have this natural trait of wanting to explore, wanting to find out, and wanting to observe and go into the unknown. So I think that was something that led me to just dive deep in the
Uh-huh.
space sector. And at first, obviously, it was not easy. And I can tell you more about it if you want to know how I started and what my
Yes, yes,
steps were.
absolutely.
But I'm glad that I've made it here.
Yeah, I'd
So
love
it
to
was not an
hear.
easy trajectory, obviously. So yeah, I started with volunteering. So I went on the Bachelor's of Material Engineering and Nanotechnology. That's a Bachelor of Science
Uh-huh.
at the Faculty of Technology and Metallurgy in Macedonia.
Mm-hmm.
I had to go to that field because it was the only field that was funding people or students, if you will. Since the first year, I usually people in Macedonia get scholarships from the second year based on their GPA. But this program, because we were in a deficit of those jobs and that profession and that education with it, I was lucky enough to go and have a high enough GPA to have the A-type scholarship from the Ministry of Education so I can afford my education. Obviously, I had to go from scholarship to be able to fund my education because I come from really modest beginnings. So in the middle of my studies, when I said, okay, I can maintain the GPA, this is enough, I can totally do this, I started getting curious and started to volunteer for any space activity out there. So, for example, World Space Week or the NASA Space Ups Challenge are basically resources out there for you that you can tap into and you can learn and grow.
Mm-hmm.
So I tried competing. I tried joining as a competitor first, as a part of teams. Then I was trying to join as a member and as a point of contact for for example, Federation Advisory Council and these different organizations that kind of bring everybody in the space field together. So I've initially started with volunteering. My second step was to try to find roles in the startup ecosystem that were
Mm-hmm.
not challenging and a material engineer could actually perform, but were related to space. So I was trying to connect bachelor's of material engineering and nanotechnology with space exploration. And I've already known how to freelance. I am a freelancer on this platform called Upwork, where I predominantly take and tackle just engineering
Mm-hmm.
problems and I collaborate with companies and I solve problems. So I wanted to tackle the more startup entrepreneurial side of that and build along in a space startup without having to have insane regulations or having a barrier of entry for myself.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how I started. I was an advisor or a researcher for a lot of space startups. Half of them are on my LinkedIn profile and half of them are just in my resume. And I haven't had the chance to update it.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I've saved enough, I've actually started saving and volunteering and working in these startups and doing the best that I can. And then I saved enough to apply to further my education. So my initial space education was the Kent State
Mm-hmm.
University. I went on the global grad exchange through the U.S. Department of State and the U.S. Embassy. So I was there and I was attending the aerospace campus at Kent State in Ohio. That was my first time in the U.S. in
Mm-hmm.
2016. And I had so many professors that were either working in NASA and teaching or retired from NASA and still teaching or just I had that chance in to be present in the fields where people could actually give you the proper traits or some novel innovations that I didn't have access to previously. Then I've graduated back home and then I went to pursue the graduate degree, commercial space studies program at Florida Tech, where my professor was Andrew Aldrin, the son of Buzz Aldrin, the second moonwalker, and I actually got a scholarship from Aldrin Family Foundation
Wow.
to attend,
Mm-hmm.
which was remarkable. There, I was their first Balkan woman that they've ever met. It was such an honor for me. I've met remarkable people. Macedonia is a small country. and I cannot compare it to space-faring nations like the US or Russia or even, I don't know, even Spain or Italy. We had so many case studies done on how to get my region and connected to space
Mhm.
exploration because we're smaller and we have less resources and we have lesser history and education and legacy when it comes to space exploration. So that education gave me so much knowledge on which countries I should compare myself with, I mean, my country with, and how to bring it closer to space exploration, doing the proper case studies and knowledge.
Mhm.
And I've met incredible professionals. I've met incredible CEOs and VPs and people like Jordan Noon, the founder of Relativity Space. And it was just an amazing, mind blowing experience that I will never forget. We were at the Kennedy Space Visitor Complex for several weeks
Mhm.
until we graduated. We've actually graduated from the slope while our diploma was handed. It was a remarkable experience. And then I went to pursue the Masters of Space Studies at International Space University. It's located in
Mhm.
Strasbourg, France, and ISU is a cradle of space in Europe. Everybody knows ISU that has any relation to space. I had an ISU
Mhm.
scholarship, and usually space agencies come to ISU and they give you some grants to do research. You have everybody that's a player there, from NASA to ESA to UNOSA to the UN even, and you have these remarkable space professionals and astronauts that are holding you classes and are attending the university. It was just, and still is, an incredible connection for me, and I can't believe I went there. I have to say that I knew about ISU since 2016 through my professors at Kent State. I went to the NASA
Mhm.
Ames Radiation Workshop. There, everybody who was international at Ames, because NASA Ames Research Center is a research center of NASA in Silicon Valley in California.
Mhm.
And everybody who was
Mhm.
international there, they said that their path towards NASA was International Space University. That was like an underlying goal of mine. I've never applied to go to space and learn about space in, for example, or any other university. I just knew that this has to be that university that everybody told me about. So after ISU, I learned the industry and the scope of it. I've learned all the proper conferences for space, the International Astronautical Federation, and their congresses that they're holding annually where everybody gathers. I've learned about the Space Generation Advisory Council and literally every organization that is there that helps and aids, especially underprivileged communities and underprivileged students, to get a proper trajectory and a career in space. And it's been remarkable. I have had colleagues from all over the globe. Some of them were usually funded by their national space agency for a grant or something. It was just an experience that taught me so much. And that's where actually I learned about analogs and how I started about analog astronaut environments, analog studies, and analog habitats.
What an incredible journey. I should really congratulate you on that. Coming back to your starting, you said you went into material science and bachelor's. Did you have an idea of getting into space at that point itself, or is it something that you discovered along the way?
Yes. So since 2014, I knew of a company and I even met the founders at NASA Ames Radiation Workshop Conference. They were called Made in Space. They were
Mhm.
launching the first 3D printer to the ISS. They were preparing to launch it in 2014. And that's when I could tie material engineering to space exploration. Currently, I even teach a master
Mm.
class about additive manufacturing and material engineering and all the processes and how that ties to space exploration. And it has incredible opportunities for a lot of applications when it comes to reusability, when it comes to testing novel materials and developing them. And also, just in general,
Mhm.
currently, for example, relativity space is 3D printing with big 3D printers, rockets for space exploration. So it's really remarkable and it can tie everything from planetary defense to
Mhm.
just building structures and systems in space. So it's a really
Mhm.
exciting field to be in. Currently, Made in Space was purchased by Redwire, also a notable company, and it became blended in it. So they do a lot of material engineering. We've actually had a tour there with, again, my professors from Florida Institute of Technology, and it was a remarkable feat of knowledge and so much for developing novel technologies, space exploration, both on the ISS, but also I believe that some will serve for extraplanetary purposes. So it's a really exciting field.
That's a good segue for my next question, which is to really understand the different fields within space. If you had to break it down into different areas, how would you break it down? The areas of space.
That's such a great question. And you have so many professions that are currently emerging. For
Mhm.
example, obviously, we all know that you have astronauts, you have people who participate
Astronaut,
in
yes.
analog astronaut studies. So, analog astronauts, you have the researchers that are doing the research, you have even space doctors or flight doctors or medical professionals that are caring about your perseverance in space as a human being. You have people who are building novel materials for rockets or just building with the sand and the sun and making things with it with technologies, or just building with the moon as sand as a resource, or the moon's dust as a resource, with the sun, with solar centers. You have so many things, from aerospace engineers to material engineers to people building the spacesuit, to food in space and how it's grown, to planting in space and
Mhm.
hydroponics, to again analog astronauts and just astronauts in general and astronautics. You have space lawyers now for legislations because we're growing and aiding everything. You have space architecture. There's really a big vicinity
Mhm.
of professions and what you can do in space. You even have science communicators. So if you're looking to
Mhm.
do marketing or you want to be doing design or something similar, you can be
Oh.
a space communicator or do graphics for a company because it's also
Mhm.
needed. You've probably seen a launch and you've seen people really explaining the process inside and out
Mhm.
when it comes to SpaceX or Axiom or even Blue Origin, trying to have these communicators properly communicate what is the science or what's the technology behind it. So it's amazing. You have a really big plethora of upcoming and emerging professions, from space law to space architecture to space medicine to just technology building. It's just an insane development currently.
Yeah, it looks like a very wide range. But as you said, commonly we hear just a few things astronauts and then rocket launches. I want to take a little bit of time to understand the whole area of astronauts. Can you give a little bit of insight into what is the difference between the astronauts versus analog astronauts?
Absolutely. So to become an astronaut, especially somebody who's funded by the government, especially in a space-faring country like the United
Hmm.
States or Russia, you basically are a really highly trained and capable, seasoned person into the profession that can endure a lot of things and can learn things quite rapidly and is really equipped, I guess, conscientious of the future missions and everything that spaceflight entails. So
Hmm.
astronauts that I've met are incredibly capable people that are so devoted, have been pilots or researchers or just these amazing, incredible, energetic individuals done so much for the profession or the industry itself. And you get selected from a public call. So many people
Hmm.
joining have these sequences that you have to go through. So you have physical readiness, psychological readiness, and interviews, and where they test you and you have to qualify to become an astronaut and serve the government's purpose. So they get elected and they have a basic training and they are training to get prepared for EVAs, vehicular activities. So they dive into pools, trying to understand the equipment. They're trying to learn about the ISS and the modules. They get expeditions together, etc. And at the end, they are usually, not all of them, but most of them, they are having and the experience of flying to space, going to the ISS, and most of them are doing EVAs or extravehicular activities or the famously known spacewalks. Analog astronauts on the other side don't have that predominantly as their career. We are doing mostly missions, but on Earth. Obviously, on us, we cannot have, because of ethics, first and foremost, you cannot have radiation on us. So you cannot do that of an ethical perspective as a researcher. You cannot just make us
Hmm.
go through toxic radiation. We don't have the zero gravity experience or the lower gravity experience, for example. Yet we try to have missions as closely as possible to what those of an astronaut would be. So, in order to test novel technology, novel habitats, novel systems, novel experiments, novel food, and donate a bunch of our data, physiological data, and cognitive data as well, so it can be further
Mhm.
aiding that field. So we have a lot of analog habitats that vary in everything. If they are remote, if they're accessible, the type of resources you're getting there, analog habitats and analog missions are vastly different from one another, from the level of hardness, or the level of how
Mhm.
challenging it is, to the resources brought, to the funding, to everything. So we have NASA supported analogs such as the novel Chapea now, where people are undergoing research. We had several selected for that. We had Sirius in Roscosmos. It's still active. It used to be a collaboration between NASA and Roscosmos, but it's only with Roscosmos and other players that are donating to make it happen. For the longer duration ones that are lasting a year, sometimes 6 months, sometimes 10 months, sometimes a year, sometimes more. And then you have different analog missions that are founded by non-governmental organizations, institutes, even universities, aided by some involvement with the NASA grant and NASA support, etc. So I went to the UND Ilmach experience that is in the University of North Dakota. And it is supported by
Mhm.
some NASA grants and partners like the Canadian Space Agency donating experiments and resources as well. I then went to the Chill Ice and Astroland mission in Spain. And then I went into Lunaris in Poland, which is a startup. The Chill Ice mission was also a startup as well. It was having
Mhm.
some ESA big grants to aid their journey, etc. So you have these different and quite vastly different habitats that are serving different missions, different research, different purpose, but in so many ways they're similar and in so many ways they're different.
Mhm. Usually, is the analog mission happening in preparation for the actual astronaut mission, or it's an ongoing process that a lot of agencies are carrying out?
So that depends. That depends of what the research is there and what you're testing. Usually,
Mm.
even some astronauts are joining some of the analog astronaut missions, or some analog astronauts are
Mhm.
becoming commercial astronauts. We know Dr.
Mhm.
Sian, she was on the Inspiration 4. We know Sarah Sabri, she was a Space for Humanity on Blue Origin. We have so many analog astronauts that are currently becoming commercial astronauts because of that experience that they had before.
Mhm.
But some analog astronaut missions are serving there solely for the research purposes, to see how longer duration missions that are going to be, for example, going in other planets like Mars, and the confinement of 6 to 9 months to a year would affect your mental health, would affect your physiological health, would affect your nutrition, would affect everything else in that aspect, and how you can exist on a base. It's similar to a base, for example, to Moon or Mars. So you would say that it's envisioned to be as a key part for understanding future
Mm.
missions or future real actual space launches.
Are the analog astronauts employed by the space agencies, or is it more like a project that you volunteer or get involved as on a contractual basis?
So that again depends because, for example, if you're going to Sirius or to Japan, you're paid by NASA
Mhm.
or Roscosmos or etc. to participate, and you're compensated based on your efforts. Obviously, some analog startups have really remarkable research grants that also pay you. But for some missions that are, I guess, some startups that also want to give you that experience but want to
Mm.
earn, you also compensate yourself, or you can pay through your research institution and bring an experiment, or just you can pay out of pocket if you want. So that's depending on the model of what type of the analog habitat, or who leads the analog mission is.
Can you participate in it even as a student, for example?
Absolutely. So there's one really high fidelity led student analog astronaut mission. It's called Asclepios, I think. I've never participated into it, but from what I've heard, even students can organize these analog astronaut missions, and they do model the European way of selection. So the European way of astronaut selection is what's modeled in Asclepios. It's what's modeled in different organizations like the Austrian Space Forum, etc. So you do, even though you'd say it's a student led organization, It's still high fidelity. It's still really professional. You still have so many phases of tests that you have to endure. So
Mhm.
again, there's different levels or different phases of what the analog mission is or how it can be perceived. I wrote a paper about the ranking of those missions and about the need of standardization of these missions, because obviously not every mission is ranked the same. And you need the ranking based on the level of the entry, what type of habitat you're having, what type of research
Mhm.
experiments you're having, etc. So not every mission could give you the same value, but they all have this aspect of aiming to better space exploration with contributing to research or getting people ready or just submerging them
Mhm.
into this stressful situation, deprived of basic foods and coffee and
Mhm.
different elements. So yes.
Mhm. Is there a higher chance of analog astronauts becoming astronaut, participating in the actual astronaut missions?
So from what I've seen, I would say that your level of readiness and your level of expertise on your resume does matter when it comes to who is becoming a private astronaut, a commercial astronaut, a citizen astronaut on programs. Obviously, if you're a millionaire or a billionaire, you can just pay it out of pocket as an experience. But if you're going to these extensive programs where you're becoming a citizen astronaut or a private astronaut, obviously these experiences do matter greatly in how you've conveyed yourself, what you did. Some experiments of the analog missions do fly on the ISS, for example. So you're serving as an analog on Earth with your own data given, and you're comparing that to astronauts, for example, or you're testing things on Earth and you see how they would react in space. So I want to believe that you have a higher chance as an analog astronaut for private spaceflight and in these programs that are trying to serve as a motivator or equalizer for equal accessibility or decentralization of space exploration.
Mhm. Makes sense. What about the education background? Is what type of different backgrounds lead you to this path? Who can become analog astronauts?
So I would like to think and believe that everybody should have the chance to become an analog astronaut. Why? Because I want to break the space bubble. In the space bubble, we have only us. It's a small world. It's a small field where it feels like everybody knows each other. So I want to
Mhm.
have more artists participate. I want to have more poets participate. I want to have more
Mhm.
actors participate, because bringing space into the mainstream, regardless of how, for example, challenging the mission might be for you, is a great learning curve. Obviously, you can get prepared ahead of time, working with the proper
Mhm.
mentors or proper academies. There's even so many academies that are now preparing you or giving you a day off experience so you can
Mhm.
see what it means to become an analog astronaut. I have so many of them now emerging across the globe, from the US to Europe and beyond, that kind of prepare you and train you to know what to expect. And so many analog astronauts before went on such trainings to give them the basics. So I really want to burst the bubble and really decentralize access to space exploration, because the more mainstream it is, the more we
Mhm.
invest and fund it. People seem to
Mhm.
forget that the more we talk about it, the more we popularize it, the more funding goes to space, and that funding translates back to Earth. Because the more you push boundaries of novel technologies and novel research, that medicine space research is put on Earth to cure diseases. The innovations in space are put in your Teflon pan, in your shoe soles that
Mhm.
are memory foam, etc. So I think it's mutually beneficial. And I think it should be a matter of preparing yourself. Obviously, the more high fidelity, the more challenging and serious the missions, the more you have to be equipped with knowledge and even some background in previous missions to show your resilience, to show your good behavior, because it's really structured when you go to a mission. Your schedules are really filled. You have to be responsible. You're responsible for yourself, if you're a crew member, for the rest of the crew, because it's a cohesion and a teamwork that's really important. You're really responsible for conveying all the research from all the researchers, maintaining the habitat, keeping all the systems functioning, and keeping yourself and the base alive, doing all the EVAs perfectly so no one is in danger. Yes, it's something that you have to be ready for, but I would love to see decentralized access to all and somebody to tell the story differently than just coming on a podcast and talking about it. So I think that's really important.
Yeah, that's very interesting. You mentioned you would like to see poets and artists. The general notion is anything related to space, we think of somebody needs to be an aeronautical engineer or an aerospace engineer or physics and science, right? That's what we correlate it with. Maybe it would help double clicking on what are some of the skills you would be utilizing as an analog astronaut, what you would be doing that helps people understand that people from different walks of life can also come in and then perform.
That's such a great question. So I would say being able to communicate well is great. So
Uh-huh.
transparency and trying to touch base with the other person and really listen to the point of view of other culture, of other opinions, etc. Because you do deflect a lot of conflicts like that and you're showing great leadership. I would say being really organized. Obviously, when you're going on any structured mission with a full schedule and where your hours are numbered and everybody mission control knows what you're doing from wake up to till going to sleep, and you have all of these tasks that you have to complete, being punctual and organized is also a great asset to have in your trait. But this is just personal. So don't listen to me. This is just what I think it's important, not necessarily the general idea. It's just something I
Uh-huh.
could gather from all of my missions. Being friendly and helpful is a must because you're relying on that crew. And I've seen so many colleagues of fellow analog astronauts that really change the perspective about them. For example, you perhaps don't speak the same language or English is not the best communication skill, but them just handing things to you or being helpful when you need it and being perceptive of that is great. Again, great perception is key as well. You have to plan ahead, know what you're doing, try to get prepared. So, being perceptive of your crewmates and being the planner ahead is also great. So, those are some of the traits that I guess people would relate to that are just having them in their normal day to day life. Everybody who is like that, please look into analog astronaut calls. I know so
Mhm.
many. I even try to share these calls as well. I am trying to communicate opportunities for everyone, literally everyone, from the NASA SpaceX challenges that I host in Cleveland and Mountain View to analog astronaut opportunities. If you
Mhm.
go on my Instagram at astrosmarta, astro lowercase smarta, on my LinkedIn, Martina Dimoska, I really try to share the opportunities as much as possible. Obviously, research life, travels, keynote speeches, conferences, or writing papers, being in a lab, or doing missions is strenuous. That's why this podcast was so prolonged. But I really try to also be a science communicator and share that on my socials. Okay.
That's so helpful for so many people. I think demystifying this space, I think is very essential for a lot of people. Let's go back to very early education days. Anybody who is any kid in high school or middle school who is really curious and interested about space, what are some of the things, resources available to them? It could be challenges, contests, or programs, anything that you could share, what they can do to sustain that and then keep progressively moving towards space industry.
So, based on the research that I know and I've tracked on my own as well, I do see that a lot of kids are really into space until like sixth to eighth grade. And then when high school peak, they're just interested in completely different things. And that's because of a plethora of reasons that sort of momentum is lost. But I think that the first thing you need to do is follow your science communicators. Follow the people on TikTok and on Instagram. There's so many of them who will get you excited about space exploration and share the resources. Oftentimes, we go into different bubbles again and lose track of our space niche. But this is what keeps you in the loop of your day to day exposure because those people are working hard to give you the proper fact, give you the proper science that's properly researched and fact checked, and also give you so many opportunities. There are so many volunteering activities that they can do. A lot of space agencies from ESA to NASA have open resources where you can join and contribute as a citizen scientist. And also, they have a lot of competitions and hackathons where you need next to nothing in skill set to know because you get there and you learn get there and in your team you have all the resources and you learn on the spot. We've seen so many teams do that. For example, at the NASA SpaceX Challenge, it is the biggest global hackathon in the world. It happens every first weekend of October and you just go and type NASA spacexchallenge.org and it's right there.
Mhm.
And again, you can volunteer. There's so many helpful organizations like the Space Generation Advisory Council. I'm the national point of contact for my country. And I know so many incredible people doing incredible initiatives and giving these amazing scholarships and grants and opportunities to just students willing to just know more. And especially if you're coming from an underprivileged background and community where you don't have the funds, because we don't have the funds. If you don't have a space agency, you're not going to have those scholarships to give you access to that education. You have to rely on your own. Chances are that in these organizations, you're going to get that scholarship because you're proactive and you're curious and you want to know more. Just a basic Google search, it will give you so many answers. But again, if you want to know more, Astro lowercase Smarta or Martina Dimoska on my socials, and I'll be glad to help because I always share opportunities for both volunteering, but also scholarships, fellowships, internships, even sometimes paid programs for research, paid programs for education, etc.
Mhm. What is the earliest age they can get involved in these challenges? Like, say, for example, NASA Space App Challenge. Is high school the right level of entry, or they can start even earlier?
So now we even have kids days in the challenges, and you can join and draw things about space or do paper models or mock-ups of anything you'd like. So we even have kids days. So there's the NASA Space Up Challenge does not discriminate of age. So you can be even a senior. We had seniors in our hackathon just coming and joining and hacking. We had kids coming and joining, some joining with their parents and just helping their projects, being so adorable and just presenting the solutions. A space, I think, is for all and it should be for all, regardless of where you're coming from or your age or your expertise. And that's the only way we can make it properly decentralized. And if we want to be extraplanetary as species, we need to get everyone on board and everyone involved.
And finally, Martina, what is your last message? I think you have shared a lot of inspiring information to youngsters and everybody. What is your final message to anybody who is really curious about space and want to explore?
So I come from a really traditional background that does not really know about space exploration, and I had to learn the hard way. And being a woman carrying a lot of culture from the Balkans is a bit challenging to navigate the full space ecosystem, yet be authentic, etc. So I would say never give up because I think that your desire to contribute to the scene will be recognized by proper individuals and proper leaders, and they will give you the proper opportunities. Like I had, although oftentimes I was the less knowledgeable of all, I just had the enthusiasm and the work ethic to get there. And just by not giving up, I've achieved so much. And I can't believe I've achieved it, to be honest, because the odds were definitely against me, and even some naysayers were definitely against me. But nowadays, when I reflect, I am really glad that I tried to follow the dream. And I'm still not there yet. I'm still learning so much and I'm still adapting and I'm still growing. And that's really natural to every one of us. But just be proactive, don't give up, follow your dreams, and try to reach out to those leaders who will believe in you and will give you the opportunities because those people exist.
Mhm. Thank you so much, Martina. This inspiring episode. I learned a lot, and I'm sure a lot of people who will watch it will find it really inspiring. All the best wishes to you in your journey. I'm sure you'll go to greater heights. And thank you so much for coming on my podcast.
Thank you. You've been a wonderful host.
This is Career Calling, and I'm your host, Pratibha Pandit. For more contents like this, please don't forget to subscribe, leave a rating, or a comment. Thank you for tuning in.